What was supposed to be a routine political discussion quickly spiraled into one of the most intense and controversial moments ever aired on Bill Maher's show. Pam Bondi, never one to back down, found herself in a verbal war that escalated far beyond expectations. When the cameras started rolling, no one anticipated what was about to happen, or how it would end. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a moment like this again. The studio lights had barely warmed the stage when the tension between Pam Bondi and Bill Maher began to simmer beneath the surface. From the opening remarks, it was clear this was not going to be a typical interview. The audience, half smirking in anticipation and half shifting uneasily in their seats, could already feel the air getting heavier. What had producers expected when they paired a firebrand former prosecutor with one of television's most unapologetically blunt commentators? Bill Maher opened with a smirk, his tone casual but loaded. "Pam, you've made a name for yourself defending some controversial positions. Do you ever wonder if you're on the wrong side of history?" The question hung in the air, deceptively light, yet barbed enough to provoke. Pam leaned in, unflinching. Wrong side? Or just the side that isn't afraid to speak the truth people do not want to hear? Was it truth or just practiced defiance? Was she standing firm, or was she digging in deeper out of pride? The audience murmured, unsure whether to cheer or brace for impact. And then, like a match to gasoline, the conversation caught fire. Maher narrowed his eyes. "Let's talk January. And the months that followed. Do you honestly believe everything you defended was about the Constitution? Or was it about protecting a crumbling brand of politics that feeds off fear?" Bondi's smile thinned. Fear or accountability? People are tired of smug elites telling them what to think. They want leaders, not lectures. The crowd stirred again. Some clapped nervously, others scoffed aloud. But Maher was just warming up. "You call that accountability? You stood by while disinformation was weaponized. You defended it, promoted it, wrapped it in a flag and called it patriotism. Where is the accountability in that?" She blinked once, then fired back. "I stood by the law and I did my job. Maybe if more people in Hollywood actually stepped outside their bubble, they'd realize that not everyone agrees with your monologue." Now, the audience was reacting. Laughter, gasps, scattered applause from a corner clearly supportive of Bondi's presence. But what was unfolding wasn't about audience approval anymore. It was about a collision course between two entirely different worldviews, one driven by sharp satire and liberal irreverence, the other by combative conservatism that wore every critique like a badge of honor. But how far was too far? What happens when conviction turns into confrontation, and a conversation becomes a battleground? As Maher leaned forward again, his voice, colder, more deliberate, you could feel the floor shifting. "Do you know how dangerous it is to conflate facts with feelings? Do you know how many people believe lies because they're wrapped in the tone of righteousness?" Bondi shot back, her voice rising. "And do you know how dangerous it is when comedians start thinking they're the moral compass of the country?" The room fell silent. Had she just crossed a line, or had she drawn one? The staff behind the cameras exchanged glances. Producers whispered in headsets. Something was happening on stage. Something unscripted. Something raw. Was this a debate or a meltdown? And who would walk away intact? Bill Maher leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The room, still stunned from Bondi's verbal jab, waited for him to strike back. But instead of erupting, he smiled, just slightly. It was the kind of smile that came not from amusement but calculation. He wasn't done, not even close. "Pam," he said slowly, "you're not just defending a political platform. You're defending a fantasy, one where facts are optional, where outrage is currency, and where losing doesn't mean losing, it just means rebranding the truth." Pam folded her arms. "I think you're confusing fantasy with faith. Some people still believe in values. Bill." Not just viral punchlines and applause lines. That subtle smile faded. He leaned forward. Faith in what? In a system that bullies dissent and silences critics by shouting louder? In a narrative that twists patriotism until it looks like paranoia? Bondi's jaw clenched. Her next words came sharp, deliberate. Maybe people are paranoid because they're tired of being lectured by people like you. People who make millions mocking the same Americans who still believe in the country you roll your eyes at every Friday night. A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. Maher's face darkened. The producers had hoped for sparks. This was fire. No, he said, his voice dropping. People are paranoid because people like you tell them they should be. You build fear into a brand. You sell suspicion as truth. You don't defend liberty. You monetize it. Pam turned sharply toward him, her voice louder now, shaking with a mixture of indignation and control. You talk about monetizing fear? What do you call this show? You sit in a studio, play judge and jury, and tell people what to think while pretending you're above it all. You're not. You're just another mouthpiece with a bigger spotlight. And just like that, something snapped. The moderator seated at the far end of the table tried to cut in, but neither of them acknowledged it. The audience was locked in. No laughter, no noise. Just raw, rising tension. Bill rose from his chair, not storming, but standing, commanding attention. Let me tell you something, Pam. I bring people on here to challenge them, not to spread propaganda. This isn't a campaign rally. This isn't cable news. This is truth, unfiltered. And if you can't handle that, maybe you should reconsider where you belong. The message was clear. Bondi, still seated, didn't move. But her eyes narrowed. The only truth you tolerate is your own. The moment someone disagrees with your version of reality, you call them dangerous, a producer waved from offstage. The moderator tried once more to steer the segment back on track. We're going to take a quick break and return. No, Bill said sharply, eyes still locked on Bondi. We're not cutting to commercial. We're cutting to honesty. Then, for the first time in the show's history, Bill turned to the control room and signaled directly. The lights dimmed. The cameras kept rolling, but the tone had changed completely. This wasn't just heated. It was personal. Too personal. Pam stood up slowly, her heels clicking against the floor. She didn't wait for permission. She looked around the audience, not with shame, but with challenge. You wanted honesty, Bill? You just got it. And then she walked off set. Gasps, whispers, then silence. Bill Maher didn't follow. He stayed rooted in place, staring at the now empty chair. The cameras cut to commercial, but the damage had already been done. What started as a televised debate had ended as a public rupture, seen live by millions. Backstage, staff scrambled. Social media lit up. Phones buzzed. Was this a meltdown or a political reckoning? The question lingered in every corner of the studio. Had Bondi overstepped, or had Maher finally met someone who refused to play by his rules? The studio's silence was deafening, as if the walls themselves were stunned. Moments after Pam Bondi walked off set, the energy had shifted from confrontational to surreal. Bill Maher remained still in his seat, now flanked only by stunned panelists and blinking production staff. For the first time in years, he looked less like the ringmaster of a political circus and more like a man trying to piece together what had just happened. The commercial break ended awkwardly. When cameras returned, the table looked strangely imbalanced. One chair empty, a void that no joke could fill. Maher adjusted his blazer, cleared his throat, and looked directly into the lens. Well, he said, that was different. Laughter was sparse. Even the audience wasn't sure what tone to follow. This wasn't one of Bill's usual spats. It was something deeper, rawer. His viewers had grown accustomed to sharp barbs and spicy banter, but this had shattered the fourth wall of comedy and exposed something much more real underneath. Backstage, Pam Bondi was not pacing. She wasn't flustered or red-faced. She was composed, calculating. Her departure had not been a tantrum. It had been a statement. As staff members whispered and avoided eye contact, she made her way calmly toward the exit, ignoring the chaos around her. A junior producer tried to intercept her. "Miss Bondi, if you'd be willing to return—" She didn't stop walking. "I don't debate bullies. Not tonight." The producer froze, helpless. Meanwhile, in the control room, directors scrambled to decide whether to cut the segment entirely or ride the viral wave it was clearly becoming. Clips had already started circulating on social media. Hashtags trended. Within minutes, commentators and influencers were drawing battle lines, each spinning their version of the clash. Was Maher the principled host who had stood up to extremism? Or had Bondi exposed a fragile man who couldn't handle dissent from someone who refused to flinch? Back on stage, the show limped forward, but nothing landed. Maher cracked a few lines, but the laughter was polite, strained. His usual rhythm was gone, replaced by a lingering sense that something unprecedented had just taken place. Then came the aftershock. Later that night, Bondi released a brief statement on social media. "I went on that show to speak truth, not to be insulted for it. When people confuse volume with virtue, it's time to walk away." It was succinct, unfiltered, and packed with purpose. Support poured in from across the political spectrum, some praising her restraint, others admiring her refusal to bow to a hostile platform. But Maher was not without his defenders. Political pundits came to his side, arguing that free speech comes with a cost, and if Bondi could not handle the heat, she should stay out of the studio. The debate evolved, stretching beyond the night's episode. By morning, it had consumed the media cycle. Major outlets ran headlines dissecting every exchange, every glance, every raised eyebrow. Articles questioned the role of political talk shows in shaping public opinion. Others accused Maher of censorship in the guise of satire. Yet the most gripping analysis came not from journalists, but from viewers themselves. For many, the exchange had broken the illusion that these shows were neutral grounds. It revealed that even comedy, when tethered to ideology, could become a battlefield. The next day, Maher returned to his show for a short taping meant to clarify what had happened. Sitting alone at his desk, he addressed the camera with a somber tone. "Sometimes debates get heated. Sometimes guests walk off. That's part of the risk. But this show will never apologize for challenging power, regardless of who holds it." He paused. "But maybe last night, maybe I forgot that challenging someone isn't the same as trying to defeat them." That line matters. It was the closest thing to an admission anyone expected. Pam Bondi, on the other hand, remained silent. She declined interviews, refused appearances, and let the footage speak for itself. But the silence only amplified her presence. People wondered, was her exit a protest or a strategy? Had she been silenced, or had she stolen the spotlight? And so the moment metastasized into something bigger. This wasn't about Maher or Bondi anymore. It was about the lines drawn in the sand. Lines between truth and showmanship, conviction and caricature. Everyone had seen the same confrontation, but no one agreed on what they had actually witnessed. The morning after the broadcast, it was as though the world had split in two. On one side were those who saw Pam Bondi as the embodiment of courage under fire, the lone voice in a hostile room who refused to be browbeaten. On the other were those who viewed her departure as a retreat, a performance of defiance wrapped in victimhood. But no matter where people stood, one thing was certain: nobody could stop talking about it. Every major news outlet had picked up the clip. Edits and reaction. Videos spread like wildfire across every social platform. Headlines declared it the moment the fourth wall cracked. The Death of Political Comedy, or, more provocatively, Bill Maher's Achilles heel. Conservative commentators labeled Bondi's walk-off a mic drop, while liberal voices accused her of orchestrating a publicity stunt. The discourse wasn't just loud, it was endless, but the people closest to the explosion were the ones reeling the most. Behind the scenes at Maher's studio, the fallout was personal. The show's producers were split down the middle. Some believed Bill had crossed a line with his relentless, unfiltered attacks, turning debate into something vindictive. Others argued Pam had no interest in a discussion, only disruption. The arguments spilled over into production meetings. Writers questioned whether they could continue under the same dynamic. Even staffers who had worked on the show for years began to whisper about whether Maher's sharpness had finally dulled into something cruel. Bill himself, ever the lightning rod, tried to steady the ship. In a staff-wide meeting 2 days later, he addressed the tension directly. "We're not here to play safe," he said, his voice measured but firm. "If you want a program that flatters both sides, this isn't it. But I never meant for it to turn into a personal ambush." There was no applause, just silence. Pam Bondi, meanwhile, had become a media ghost. She declined requests from primetime interviewers, refused to issue follow-up statements, and avoided any public events. Her sudden absence only fueled more speculation. Was she playing the long game? Was she waiting for the perfect moment to re-emerge? Or had the confrontation taken more out of her than anyone realized? Her allies took to the airwaves in her stead. Former colleagues, pundits, and political influencers praised her stand. Some even claimed the walk-off was a turning point in how conservatives engage with traditionally hostile media. A few hardliners demanded networks rethink the kind of voices they elevated, asking why someone like Bill Maher got to dictate the rules of debate. But something unexpected happened. For the first time, viewers who had always leaned left began questioning what they had witnessed. The smug laughter, the relentless interruptions, the audience's jeers. It no longer felt like comedy. It felt like control. Social media threads emerged not from trolls or partisans, but from people who had previously applauded Maher's wit. They asked, "When does a debate stop being a conversation and start becoming an ambush? Should dissenting guests be invited only to be cornered? Was this entertainment or indoctrination with a laugh track?" The moment had ignited a broader cultural discussion, not just about Maher and Bondi, but about the entire media landscape. Talk show hosts had long claimed to hold power accountable, but more people were realizing that power wasn't limited to those in government. Influence, audience, size, platform, those were forms of power too, and when used without reflection, they could be just as dangerous. As days passed, Bondi's silence became more potent than a dozen interviews. Her absence painted her as unbothered, above the noise, maybe even victorious. And then, on the 7th day, she reappeared. It was not on a television program, nor in a news interview. It was a town hall in Florida, in front of everyday voters. She took no questions about Maher. She did not reference the show, but her opening line sent chills through the room. "I was told the best way to win an argument is to yell louder than your opponent." "I disagree." The crowd rose. The applause was thunderous, not because of the line, but because of everything it represented. She had flipped the narrative. She was no longer the guest who stormed off a set. She was the woman who refused to surrender, her voice to the volume of someone else's. And somewhere in Los Angeles, Bill Maher was watching. He didn't say a word, but those close to him noticed something different in his next broadcast. He was still sharp, still funny, but when he welcomed his next controversial guest, there was restraint in his tone. A pause before every barb, a hint of caution where there had once been pure confidence. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was growth. Either way, the confrontation had changed them both. The tension that had once sizzled on Bill Maher's stage had now spilled far beyond the studio lights. Pam Bondi's quiet return had done something few had expected. It reframed the entire conflict. What had begun as a media spectacle was evolving into something deeper, something that challenged how political dissent was treated in public discourse. Bill Maher, now days removed from the infamous episode, was under pressure not only from the press, but from his own conscience. Friends who had always defended his brash style now offered more reserved counsel. One longtime colleague who had been part of the writing team since the early days finally said what many were thinking. "She did not walk away because she was weak," he told Bill in private. "She walked away because you did not listen." The words struck harder than intended. Bill, for all his experience, had built his reputation on being unflinching. But this moment was not just about a debate. It had become a referendum on the way debate itself was handled. Were guests truly allowed to express themselves, or were they brought on as foil, as easy targets? When Maher returned to air the following week, viewers noticed a subtle but unmistakable shift. There was no dramatic apology, no self-flagellation, just a clear, purposeful change in tone. He introduced his first guest, a conservative commentator, and allowed them to finish a thought. The audience still laughed, the zingers still flew, but the balance had shifted. There was a newfound edge of self-awareness, and for once, a quiet undercurrent of humility. Across the country, Bondi's reappearance continued to make waves. Her refusal to engage in a media tour had made her stand out in an era when outrage was currency. And now, in each appearance, she carried the same message. Not about victimhood, but about standards. About how politics, entertainment, and journalism had blurred into one messy spectacle. "What happened on that set wasn't the problem," she told a packed auditorium in Dallas. "It was the symptom. We stopped treating disagreement as strength. We started treating it like treason." The applause she received was no longer partisan. It came from people who were tired of shouting, tired of the games, people who had watched their own ideas dismissed with a punchline or shouted down with a smirk. And then a moment no one predicted happened. A letter, not a formal statement, not a media pitch, just a single handwritten letter delivered to Bondi's office. It was from Bill Maher. In it he acknowledged what had occurred. He didn't recant his beliefs, nor did he paint himself as the villain. He simply wrote, "I realize now I was not debating you. I was defending my stage from something I had not taken the time to understand. For that, I owe you more than silence." Bondi never read the letter aloud. She never used it as ammunition. But in a later interview, when asked whether she believed Maher had changed, she paused only a moment before answering. "I believe he realized that sometimes being heard matters more than being right." The nation watched as this rare human moment spread. It became clear that neither of them had won or lost in the traditional sense. What they had done, through clashing, confronting, and ultimately reflecting, was open a national wound, and, in doing so, they forced it to breathe. In the weeks that followed, both figures found renewed platforms. Maher's show saw increased viewership, not just for the controversy, but for its new tone. Bondi was invited to more bipartisan forums, praised not just for her politics, but for her poise. And something changed in the country. Slowly, awkwardly, but undeniably. Talk shows began inviting guests who disagreed with the host, and letting them speak. Comment sections still fought, but they quoted more than they mocked. Even late-night monologues added a beat of consideration, where ridicule once came instantly. In a culture driven by volume, Pam Bondi and Bill Maher had reminded everyone that silence, when chosen, can be louder than 1,000 arguments, because sometimes walking off the stage does not mean surrender. It means resetting the conversation. And in the end, the audience had not just watched a debate. They had witnessed a reckoning.